This is Comic Geek Speak episode 1911, The Neverending Story, Retro Movie Review.
The video arcade is down the street. Here we just sell small rectangular objects. They're called books. Require a little effort on your part and make no beep 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 beeps. On your way, please.
I know books. I have 186 of them at home.
Ah, comic books.
No, I've read Treasure Island, The Last of the Mohicans, Wizard of Oz, Lord of the Rings, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Tarzan.
Whoa. Listen, have you ever been Captain Nemo, trapped inside your submarine while the giant squid is attacking you?
Yes,
Weren't you afraid you couldn't escape?
but it's only a story.
That's what I'm talking about. The ones you read are safe.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek speak, comic geek. Uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is.
I'm Adam Murdo.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Shane Kelly.
And I'm Chris Eberly.
Welcome one and all to the show. And we are retro once again on this episode as we present to you the Neverending Story.
I think pretty much the four of us are always retro.
Yes. Well, I mean, to be fair, yes, but we're specifically retro on this episode. And yes, Chris, I had to pick the one that involved comic books on the entire movie. So there you go.
Well chosen.
Yeah, Neverending Story. Murd, thank you for picking a movie from when I was 6 months old, so I really do appreciate that. Back in 1984, baby.
I would have been about, I think I was a year younger than, oh my God, the kid that played the
Noah
warrior.
Hathaway?
Noah Hathaway.
Oh, okay.
He was born in 71. I was 72, so.
Yep,
Okay.
I was 11. We should also remind listeners, in case we have new listeners, what the format of Retro Movie Review is.
Yeah, so of course.
Why don't we go back and...
Well, we pick films that if CGS existed prior to its inception in 2005, these are movies we would have talked about.
Yes.
So geek-oriented films, and this is certainly one of those.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. And this is very much a classic of the sci-fi fantasy genre that 100% we would have been talking about had podcasts existed back in the year 1984, had computers like this existed, and talking to people that weren't in the room with you outside existed. That's exactly what would have happened. And Murd, I thank you very much for this pick, as it definitely brought me back.
Well, I thank you all for this opportunity, to go retro a la Murdo tonight and talk about what I consider and have publicly proclaimed to be my favorite 80s movie.
Yes, excellent. Well, we will get into depth on all of our thoughts on Neverending Story in just a moment. But before we get there, we thank, hold on, it's a different camera today. So there we go, there it is. You over at patreon.com/comicgeekspeak. For all the support that you give this show. We really do appreciate it. For as little as $1 a month, you can contribute to the continued support of the show. Occasionally, we remember to send you some, extra goodies here or there, or even just some advance warning on previews or what have you, and get your thoughts and picks in there. But in general, it's just a way to just show your thanks to the show for just as little as $1. For those of you who are not part of Patreon, who want to donate to the show, there is still the option of going to comicgeekspeak.com/donate.php and giving us a PayPal donation of your choosing. But if you can't monetarily support that in any way, then please, by all means, just spread the word about the show, comment on the super group, comment on YouTube, let people know what you're thinking, and let other people know about the show. That's really all that matters. So Patreon.com/comicgeekspeak for your support. We really do appreciate it.
And we should note also that these donations will especially be helpful because in the months to come, we definitely need to do some studio upkeep and renovations.
That's right. We did have some water damage in our CGS sanctum recently, and a couple things might need to be replaced.
Yes, indeed. And we will find that out together, hopefully in the future. Anywho, back to the matter at hand. And that, of course, once again, is the Never-Ending Story. This movie was originally released a little bit before it got released in America. It was actually released in Germany.
Oh, yes, where it was also made, of course.
Indeed. The actual release date for the movie was somewhere in July. Let me get the actual official date here. I thought I had it up, and for some reason I do not. July 20th, 1984 is when the official U.S. release date for Neverending Story was. Wolfgang Peterson, the director of this, Michael End, great name, the story, and obviously distributed by Warner Brothers and a couple of other subsidiaries along there. And it's an adaptation in part of the Neverending Story, the first book in the series. In part because this is very much only part one. And we will also talk about part 2 and 3 just in name alone, because I've never seen those movies. And
I don't think I did either.
All I know is that there's a consistent trend in these movies, and that's the kid is never the same.
And they get a little worse each time.
Yes, indeed. I know the second one had that name's escaping me now. Lucas from Sequest.
Yep. I can't remember his name either at the moment.
Hold on, I just looked this up before we started recording.
I looked it up last night. Gosh, that's terrible.
Escaped my brain. And that, of course, is... Once I find the cast list on here.
Meanwhile, people are either saying, what's Sequest? Or, oh my God, I can't believe you don't remember his name. So, one of those two things.
Sequest DSV was one of my favorite shows at one point. Jonathan Brandis played
That's it.
In the second.
Not to go sidebar, but I did like Sequest a lot. Both iterations.
I
both seasons, whatever you want to say.
I agree with you on that. And of course, Roy Scheider, a part of the Sequest.
One of my favorite actors.
Yep, that was a high point.
Yep, but deviating back to Neverending Story.
Neverending Story.
Chris, I'll start with you. We'll go to Murd last because we know that
he's in order of experience with the films.
Indeed. Yep. Chris, your initial thoughts on Neverending Story?
First of all, I'd never seen this,
and
as I was watching it, Murd, I was kind of shocked because I was 11 years old. My parents took my brother and I to movies all the time, like, similar films like Last Unicorn, Dark Crystal. And I'm just surprised for whatever reason we were never taken to see this film. And I loved it. But I have one sort of pang of sort of in that I think if I had the memory of watching it as a kid, I think I would have enjoyed it even more. Because I saw this solely through the eyes of a 50-year-old man. That didn't diminish my enjoyment of it, but there are elements of the film, like I think it's kind of hilarious that this kid's like no one's noticed, like he's just vanished,
right?
Including apparently his own father, for I don't know how long in this very creepy attic, which most schools never have. So that was kind of like the adult version of me reacting, where as a kid, I wouldn't have even thought of anything like that. But that's more for fun than anything else. But I was thoroughly entertained. I didn't realize Wolfgang Peterson, who directed Das Boot, one of the greatest World War II films ever made, in my opinion.
Yep.
So, this is a top tier director.
Oh yeah.
Doing this film. And I was totally charmed. I thought all the kid actors were great. I loved the creatures they had. I mean, they were so evocative of the 80s, like puppetry and effects that were available at that time, which of course I look at very nostalgically with great pleasure. I was thoroughly entertained, and I like the fact that there was a bit of an edge to this fairy tale, as there really should be with most true fairy tales.
Oh yeah.
Like when the horse went down in the muck, I was like, oh, that was a gut punch.
Martha would not watch this with me, by the way, because she had nightmares from it as a kid, and it was stuff like the horse getting trapped in the mud and the universe,
Work, perhaps.
Yep, and the universe exploding and the very creepy princess that I'm sorry, she's creepy. Whether
Little
intended
girl with a lot of makeup.
Oh yeah, yep. She kind of like had like a half Zelda look going for her, but in the process, she almost looked like she was being like photoshopped in 1984 with that they caked on her. But yeah, I can completely understand how a kid at that point would have definitely gotten nightmares from this thing.
Well, and to add to that, as you mentioned, Ian, I love the whole idea of like the nothing and. I mean, I figured out very quickly like why it was happening. I mean, the reasons for it I think were telegraphed pretty clearly, but
Sure.
It didn't change the fact for me that there felt like there were real stakes in the story, and coupled with the fact that the kid on Earth, you know, his mother died. He's got like a classic 1980s era father who was like, "Sure, son, go to school. I'm going to work," in his 80s era suit, and like. Never see or hear from him again. You just got to find your feet. You know, your mother died. It's all that was very evocative of like a particular time period.
Yeah,
and that I really enjoyed that as well. But to finish my initial thoughts, it's just this movie this movie could have bored me, and I really was entertained by it, and I was moved by it. Like there was again the stakes, and also just like near the end when the rock creature is essentially bemoaning the fact that his strong hands couldn't save his little companions. Like scenes like that, put this movie a notch above for me.
Oh, absolutely, no question about it. Shane, your initial impressions?
So as I watched it, I realized I don't think I ever saw this before either.
Oh,
I thought I
wow.
would have watched it on HBO or something. It was on, but I don't remember any of it as it went through. Other than to say stills and pictures that I've seen throughout the years. I knew of the scene with the horse drowning in the mud. That is featured on so many little clips about things that we had to deal with as kids in the 80s, and that's one of them.
There's a Facebook meme called, it's entitled 80s Childhood Trauma Starter Pack.
Yeah, and that's
Artax is definitely in there.
And I knew where it was from, and I just thought that I just didn't remember the whole movie as well. But I really don't think I ever saw it, because a lot of it I didn't remember. I enjoyed it. I loved all the puppetry and special effects and the way everything was the way it was, because it was the 80s and this was what they could do. I love the design of the fantastic creatures that populated this movie.
Oh, sure.
Very, very adventurous, very fantasy driven, very enjoyable. I like the story. At times I thought it was choppy, but I agree with Chris that if I would have watched this as a kid more and been one of my favorites, I would have a different nostalgic love for it than I do by watching it. It wasn't bad at all. I just wanted things like, well, doesn't anybody know he's missing? Why is the dad not looking for him? And we get to the end, I'm like, well, why didn't they go back to the dad or anything? It's very adult things to think of, which is not what this movie is geared for.
Right.
It's like, well, I get that he's wishing things, but he wouldn't fly through the city with this creature and terrorize the bullies. But that doesn't make sense. Like, there are very adult things that I almost could not get out of my head as I was watching certain parts of it.
What was funny about that scene, Shane, is that if you notice the overall footage of that when he's in the city, he's terrorizing everybody on the streets.
Oh yeah,
not just the bullies.
Not just the bullies. Everyone's screaming. And I'm like, that's a little weird.
That part actually reminded me a little bit of not that I'm a big fan of the movie, but the second Shazam movie, and the scene of the the trolls and what have you. Like once all those characters but come to life and they start running amok in Philadelphia. Like
sure.
That's the idea that I got from that. Like it was a similar feel.
Now, I also agree, Chris, with what you said about it being a very atypical 80s movie father.
Yes.
And I related very much to it in how they portrayed the father, although you saw him a lot more, in Cloak and Dagger with Dabney Coleman. Because he played, what was it, Jack Flash?
Jack
Anyway,
Flag.
Jack
Jack
whatever.
Flag. Flag.
Jack Flag.
Yeah.
But the father himself, the true father, was very much, well, almost buck up, kiddo. You know, your
Yeah.
mom died. Oh well. Doo, doo, doo.
Yep. He's gonna drink this raw egg in the back.
Yeah. I was
really
surprised. I know I never saw the second one. I know, of course, that Jonathan Brandis played in it, but I did not realize John Wesley Shipp took the role of the father in the second one.
Ah,
Oh.
Which I'm like, oh well. The first time I ever saw him was The Flash. I knew he was in a ton of other stuff, but I would have seen him in that and remembered it if I would have seen it. So I know I never saw that.
my other favorite part of that second movie, Shane, which again I'm also pretty sure that I never saw, is that it's directed by George Miller, but not that George Miller, another George Miller. So
Yeah.
not the one that did Mad Max and all that other jazz. Another George Miller who happens to be a director.
Yeah. But I really did enjoy it. It had a little bit of a feel of the oh my God, The Princess Bride,
Yes.
Labyrinth,
Oh,
Dark
there's a-
Crystal.
There's a scene that I think inspired The Princess Bride heavily.
Yeah, there's so many things that this either inspired or took part in, or they just all told similar stories during the 80s, which was an awesome time to tell stories like this anyway. So I did really enjoy it. I do have one question for Murd later that, again, my adult head puzzles me, but that's for later in the show.
Oh, okay.
All right. I'll give my take on this. I do remember this being one of my favorites as a kid. Obviously, I watched it, in the HBO era, long after it was in theaters. Because as I said, it was released in theaters when I was 6 months old, and I definitely didn't see it then. But I do remember seeing it about. I must have been like maybe 7 or 8 when I saw it for the first time. I forget whether we rented it or whether we saw it on HBO, but if it was a rental, I will call out a long since no longer existing video rental place that we used to get our stuff from before there was a Blockbuster Video in Brooklyn. Its name was Royal Video, and I remember very clearly on Coney Island Avenue and like Neck Road was Royal Video. And we'd go in there like once a week. We'd get 5 or 6 movies. We'd bring them home, and then that would be our movie bucket for the next couple of weeks. And then we'd go ahead and return them whenever we were said and done. And Neverending Story, I loved just for its aesthetic. And looking back on it today, I mean, you guys pretty much mentioned this already, but like, this movie is 80s as hell, but it's 80s as hell in the dark fantasy way, because so many movies looked like this at that particular time. But I don't mean it in a bad way. I think that this is very much an aesthetic that mid to late 80s movies all try to get, whether it be Dune, whether it be Princess Bride, as already mentioned in some ways, whether it be Labyrinth, whether it be Dark Crystal, all of these are going for like the set with Muppets aesthetic, and it I think it works probably close to best, if not best, in this movie. The set dressings are lush and believable. What I have on screen right now with those statues, I thought was absolutely epic.
Yep.
The only real thing that doesn't hold up is the obvious green screen today, but that's what do you expect? Superman flying doesn't hold up the way it used to either back at today because of that exact same reason.
I have to say that I agree with Chris that it's also very edgy too in many ways.
Oh yeah.
And one of them was, and not to sound too, I don't know, maybe facetious, if that's the right word to use, I was surprised that the statues had nipples that we're looking at right now. For a kids kind of movie, it's not out of place. I mean, it makes sense for the design of those statues, but I was like, oh, well, that's kind of weird for a kid movie. Fantasy. Okay.
I mean, pre PG-13 still,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that's the type of stuff that they could still get away with at that point if they were aiming for PG, but not R.
Go back to Clash of the Titans in '81.
Yeah,
The
you're right
mother
there too.
is walking
But that one's a
lovingly
little
beautifully on
bit
the
more
beach.
adult of
No, that's fair.
a movie than
Sure.
this being a kid reading a book, narrating kind of through it fantasy. Again didn't distract me, wasn't a bad thing. I was just like, oh, I forgot that this would be in the 80s like this, because that's that's something that you would have taken your kids to see in the theater and go, oh, hey, yo, cover your eyes there, maybe.
It's
Because
a Sphinx-like statue.
oh, right, oh, totally. And my parents wouldn't have had a problem with it. I'm just saying, it's just surprised me seeing it.
Well, you know what? You know what surprised me, Shane, and this is through the eyes of a kid, and then not watching it for like 20 years, and then watching it now, is that in my brain, he's in the world way more than he actually is in the movie. Like me, I have images of Bastian being amongst the world so much more, and it doesn't happen until like the last 10-15 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, I really thought he was going to be in it more as the story went on.
Absolutely. Story-wise, it even makes sense that he's not in it. But in that way, it's yet again to bring up the Princess Bride. That's the feel of it. Like, he is essentially not quite the narrator of it, but he's reading the book, and the events of the book are taking place. The main difference,
and simultaneously, the book is reading him.
Yeah,
exactly, and that's what's pretty damn awesome about it.
We never went back to the book guy.
Oh my God, you're right. We did never go back to the book guy. In fact, I wonder if he shows up in the subsequent movies at all. But
We've got to give the book back at some point.
Yeah, or maybe it's just, maybe it's just that library book he never returns. But I really am glad that I went back to this after all these years, and frankly, I think in many ways it still holds up. I think that what Chris and Shane are saying makes a lot of sense. However, 80s dad who clearly went to a seminar at his work and decided that's how he's going to speak to his son. Well, son, you need life goals. And you see, in my 5-point plan that I'm going to present to you right now,
Yeah.
like oh my God, like how is this how you're gonna, like, I'm really sad that my wife and your mother died, but you know what you need goals, and I'm going to point that out to you right now on this board that I brought with me and that I happen to have. It's wow.
Now my dad wasn't like that, I can safely say, but I do know dads that were. It was a very very almost Wall Street movie business macho mentality, and it's insane.
It really,
it's not for nothing that the actor Gerald McRaney is better known for having played the title role in Major Dad on CBS. So he's got to make.
And I love him
being like a comically unfit father figure.
Wasn't he also in Simon and Simon or Riptide? One of the two. I think it was Simon and Simon, but I could be wrong about that.
I seem to recall one of them had a mustache, so maybe. I never watched Simon and Simon.
Okay.
That's a Matt question.
I can certainly look that up for you. Also, he didn't even have a name. He's just called Bastian's father. His actual, his character is quite literally Bastian's father. That's it. Like, they didn't even bother giving him a name because he didn't need one in the end.
But I love him in almost anything I see him. He plays a small part in West Wing for a few episodes too, and I think he's great in there.
He was also in Deadwood the movie over the years. He
was in Designing Women for a while too.
He's been on 24. He's been a voice on some animated series like Family Guy and Duncanville.
Yep.
He's had a very long career over the years. But I'm super duper glad that I got to revisit this. And now, Murd, the floor is yours.
Gentlemen, I thank you again for joining me for this, what for me is one of the multiple revisitations of what is a foundation stone of my young imagination and my adult tastes in fantasy entertainment. Now, Ian has said that he was 6 months old when this thing was released. I was 5 years and 6 months, 5.5, just a few short weeks away from beginning kindergarten. And I can remember seeing advertisements for this movie and asking earnestly to be taken. My parents relented. We went to see it at the Fairground Square Theater, Shane.
Nice.
The mall where Golden Eagle was located. We ate dinner beforehand as the sun began to sink in the west at the Roy Rogers restaurant that used to exist on the other side of the 5th Street Highway.
Wow.
And I was just sitting there thinking, as soon as I finish these French fries, we're going to go see this movie. We're going to fly with Falcor the Luck Dragon. And so I didn't really know what to expect from it, from the TV ads, just that, there were fantasy elements and puppetry and stuff. And I was absolutely not disappointed. That much I can tell you. I mean, I'm sure my eyes were as large as saucers for almost the entire 90-minute running time of the thing. And, significant to note here that I'm pretty sure that this was the first movie I ever went to see in the theater that was not either A, animated, or B, Muppeteered. So this was a major stride forward in sophistication in terms of my film consumption habits. It was just head and shoulders above anything else I'd seen on the big screen thus far, because it was mostly just like Disney movies, new or old. And here I was exposed to a very different kind of filmic fairy tale. And as Chris and Shane have both observed, it had a definite edge to it. This was, and I feel like I have to say this pretty explicitly here. This was not really a children's movie. It's a fantasy film. It was designed, for marketing purposes in the United States, if nothing else, to be palatable for most children. But it's really not aimed exclusively at them. It's not made for kids. It's just accessible to kids. It's a fantasy film that's supposed to have meaning for all ages, and including sensitive little 5.5-year-olds like me. But yes, the fact that there were some definite frightening elements, the Gamork was certainly scary to me. The scene with the golden Sphinx gate, the bare boobs probably didn't land with me so much in those days. And they're just, there is some art history precedent for that. I mean, just look at the actual sphinxes produced by ancient Egyptian sculptors, and that's they're out for including that in there. But just the fact that that brave knight came riding up to the Sphinx and got zapped by their eye beams, and later on Atreyu gets a face full of his melted skull of a face behind the visor. That was the one point in that movie that I, for years afterward, on my frequent reviewings, would kind of turn away from the screen and not. I didn't want to look that knight in the eyes. There were some elements there that were a little bit frightening, The nothing. I mean, the symbolism, as Chris says, as an adult, the symbolism of the nothing is a little bit clearer to see. Yeah. And the creator of this whole world, who's Michael Ende, the German novelist, he wrote this in 1979, and I think he was inspired by kind of the same things that George Lucas was when he put Star Wars to film. He saw a generation growing up without fairy tales, and saw fit to create one to fill that void. And here's Michael Ende kind of commenting on that phenomenon at the same time as he produces this epic fantasy to help fill it. Because that's kind of what the nothing is supposed to be. It's this, one of the side effects of late capitalist life, you might want to say, if you feel like over-intellectualizing this. That's kind of what it represents. The emptiness and the angst in modern life that's left behind when hopes and dreams and fantasies are leached out of a person, out of a lifetime of drudgery. And so Michael Ende just kind of saw the mass folklore and fantasies of the entire world, all the cultures of the world, as represented by the land of Fantasia, which is kind of like a gestalt of the human imagination from all over the world. Weird little fantasy creatures from mythologies the world over. So all that was lost of me as a 5-year-old, of course, but sure. As an adult, it's fun to revisit. And it's also interesting, if we want to, those of us, our listeners who may be sitting at home whining to themselves, but why are they talking about this movie? It's not about comic books. Here's your comic book connection. Beyond the clip expertly chosen by our producer in which comic books are mentioned, there are definite similarities between the nothing, between like the central problem of this story and Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh, sure.
Because it's a fantasy, a composited fantasy realm that is being slowly and systematically annihilated by mysterious, terrifying, demonic, crypto-fascistic forces that would rather rule over an infinite void than allow a realm of infinite creativity to continue to exist and to run rampant unchecked, and to empower those who dwell within it and those who benefit from it, i.e. the readers. The nothing, it's awfully close to the white wave of antimatter that was slowly eliminating the DC multiverse. Yeah. And perhaps worth mentioning that in 1984, as this movie was hitting theaters worldwide, Len Wein and Marv Wolfman were working on the story for Crisis on Infinite Earths. So, there may be some cross-pollination of inspiration happening there. I'm not going to, point fingers, or I'm just saying it's a possibility.
Oh, sure.
Correlation is not causation, but it's an interesting thought to entertain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
All of this, of course, would not factor into my engagement with this movie for a long time to come. But it's just the fact that the movie was, it had that edge, it had that just a little bit of darkness and frighteningness, which, as Chris rightly pointed out, all good fairy tales, and especially European fairy tales, this movie being very much German in origin, a lot of the classic fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm and what have you were downright gruesome. You know, it's just very frightening and very graphic or bloody. So having that those frightening elements in it just served to ensconce it or entrench it that much deeper in the imagination of the young people like me who saw it at the time. But even beyond the edge, the movie just, in terms of tone and mood, it had a dignity to it. You know, it had a majesty. It had a somberness to it that I didn't really get from the Disney animated fairy tales that had been my meat and drink to that point as far as movie going. So it was a major step up for me in terms of appreciation of the art of filmmaking, and just this heavily stylized visual elements of the movie, the wonderful fantasy landscapes as Atreyu and Artax go galloping off across Fantasia to try and find the answer to the childlike empress's ailment, and he just rides across desert and crystal-strewn wasteland and just galloping from trapper-keeper cover to custom van paint job. It's all extremely 80s and reminiscent of the music video production of the time.
Oh, absolutely.
And so it's very, very 80s, and it's also very, very German/European. And it was just left an indelible imprint on my imagination.
And it's funny too, Murd, that I could even see comparisons here. I mean, to one of your favorite things, Wizard of Oz.
Yep, I was going to say that.
And also Lord of the Rings, very much so. Even in the general idea of, you know, like man trekking across various wildernesses in order to, you know, save the world and you know, stop a major destruction from occurring. You know, that's basically Lord of the Rings for you right there. I mean, when you boil it down to it. So
basically, but still more terrifying, because, you know, the worst case in the Lord of the Rings, this great evil was just going to conquer and burn stuff and enslave everybody. Here, things were just flat out ceasing to exist.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Vanishing entirely. Just we're talking. I'm talking again of similarities to Crisis on Infinite Earths. They were both born from the same kind of undercurrent or zeitgeist of mid to late 80s apocalypticism. Yeah. Just a sensation that, late Cold War nuclear paranoia aside, there was just this sense that a lot of the old things, the traditions of culture, were slowly being eroded by one mysterious and frightening force or another. And so that kind of ties into what was happening there too.
And just knowing your love of things like The Wizard of Oz, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Muppets, puppetry, special effects the way they are, fairy tales, I can definitely see, even a 5-year-old Adam, why this would appeal to you and build that foundation for things they will love for years to come, and add to that. Here's where I love the Neverending Story, and then you kept adding this layers of different things, very similar and had same emotions and invocations to it, but it just grew your palette of things in that capacity.
Yeah. I think Murd also has made a really good point, 2 good points I want to piggyback on. First of all, I agree wholeheartedly. I really felt the fact this movie was made by Europeans, specifically Germans.
Oh, yeah.
In that, and what I mean by that is, if you contrast, let's say this movie had been made by an American studio, Disney or whoever, you wouldn't have had the knight's corpse showing you after being disintegrated. The horse scene is traumatic.
You wouldn't have had that at all.
And I mean, they don't show you the horse fully submerged at the end, but it's pretty close to it.
Oh, yeah.
And the other scene that I thought was very dark and very powerful, when he comes to the mirror or the glass, and like this, that's a very chilling scene. And like just the atmosphere. I think there's snow or something, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you know, Bastian is like screaming the other side. It's like Murd's right on the money. This is not just for kids. Like any true fairy tale should not just be for kids. And I think the filmmakers really brought that sensibility. And I'm glad Murd also brought up the Cold War. And I hadn't thought about that, but he's made a great point, because it's 1984. So there's two Germanys at this point. So they're filming this in West Germany, and we may forget that, because it may seem so remote to us now, but in the 80s, the Cold War was very intense, and there was a lot of concern, especially in Europe, where there's a lot of concerns about, well, there's all these missiles stationed here, and there were protests and all these different things that were going on. That kind of stuff inevitably is going to influence, sort of the atmosphere, the attitude of people who are making a movie like this, because most people don't think about it now at all, even though they really should, because the missiles are still out there. But people were worried about, nuclear Armageddon.
I was just going to say, we're almost 40 years into that, and here we are starting to worry about that again in a very real way.
Sure. Yeah.
We should always worry about it.
Well, that's very true there.
There's that mirror, which is just dripping with like Jungian and Lacanian psychology.
Yeah, absolutely.
I found that one of the most powerful shots in the whole movie.
It is, yeah, and just the staging of it and the execution of it. You feel the vastness of the area that he's in, even though it's quite literally a soundstage, but not. That's something that this pulls off very, very well, actually, is that not once did I think to myself, this is a soundstage. I think that for the most part, with a combination of the matte paintings and the
green screen
stuff and what have you, they pull off the world making of it all very, very well for 1984.
Yes.
Yeah, the vastness of it.
For the most part, hold up. The only time I did kind of get the impression that, okay, this is a soundstage, is when he wakes up after Falcor rescues him, and they're just in front of this big black sky with stars, and I'm like, okay, it's probably a wall behind them. But other than that.
And what's all the more impressive about the directing is when you think about some of the films Wolfgang Petersen has made, like later on he made Air Force One, he made In the Line of Fire with Clint Eastwood, he did Troy, which has a very problematic movie, but all those films. But his claim to fame before this was Das Boot, which is a deeply suffocating film because it's all in a U-boat. I mean, it's a masterpiece in my opinion. But then he goes from that to something like this, and he's creating this amazing environment on these soundstage, and like you say, creating this sense of vastness to this world. Really, very impressive filmmaking. By the way, Shane, you would appreciate this. Do you know who Noah Hathaway played as a little boy before this movie?
Outdoor Boxy in Battlestar Galactica. Yeah, absolutely.
Figured you would.
Yeah.
And these days he owns at least according to IMDb trivia, this is still the case. He now owns and operates a tattoo parlor in Los Angeles, California with his wife. So that he's long since retired from the world of acting, and he is in no relation to Anne Hathaway. That is just another person with the last name of Hathaway. So also want to bring that up as well.
Well, and something you said, Chris, about going from Das Boot, which I don't think I have ever seen that either, but it sounds like a very heavy movie. While this is very edgy, this is very fantastical, this is very hopeful in a lot of ways. That you're right. It is an interesting difference from what he was doing probably on Das Boot to this movie, which in the end does give a happy ending, a hopeful ending, a reawakening of the world.
Das Boot is about a German U-boat in World War II. It's not hopeful. But
which is what I figured. But yeah,
both films show the technical mastery of Petersen as a director. I mean, you're talking about two diametrically different environments.
Absolutely.
One a super realistic war
confined
film, and confined for the most part,
and then later on in his career, the confined space of Air Force One. As a perfect example, that still holds up, but like 3/4 of that took place on a plane. It's Die Hard on a plane. That is the point of that movie. And he knows how to work with that space just as well as he did this. So something to bring up. Also, while we're on the topic of Germany, two quick things that I want to make sure that I get across. One, when this movie was made, this was the most expensive film ever produced in Germany.
Really?
It cost 50 million Deutschmarks, which is $27 million. And nothing of that scope had ever been produced before in Germany And then Neverending Story came along, and it became their most expensive movie of the time. I'd love to know what it is today, but that's research that I did not execute before the recording of this episode.
It might be the masterful television series Babylon Berlin.
That's possible. Yeah,
possibly.
I'll look
possibly.
it up. One of the of you were talking at one point. But the other thing is that you can still ride Falcor to this very day.
Oh, really? The Munich Film Park.
Yep.
Really?
Yep. It's there on display. So if you ever visited Bavaria Film Park in Munich, there's Falcor for everybody to get their photo opportunity with and put it up on Instagram of them riding the dragon to this.
I love the design
cool.
of Falcor because he had this lovable, like dog-like face,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a wonderful creation.
The only thing I would have liked for my taste in any kind of dragon is, and I know this is not indicative of the dragon that he is, larger wings. I prefer my dragons with larger wings.
I don't think he even had wings. It's just
They were two tiny little ones. I think on there's something wing-like or
something ailer.
yeah.
Yeah, the design is it comes from Chinese mythology, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
That's
That's what I would take it as well.
Oh, and the voice, incidentally, you may recognize it. Alan Oppenheimer. He was.
I saw that.
Yep, he was also the voice of Skeletor and Battle Cat from He-Man and Masters of the Universe, and Vanity Smurf, among many other characterizations in the 80s.
Nice.
Yep. He also did the voice of Gamork, and I didn't know this until a day or two ago, but he was the Rock Biter too.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I looked up on IMDb and saw all that.
I was going to say that I was wondering if it was John Rhys Davies as I was watching the movie, because it was a familiar voice, but yeah, the good range. Like I never guessed that was all the same person. That's really well done.
Gamork was frightening, by the way.
Oh yeah,
Almost those eyes, almost in shadow, the fangs, like you weren't sure exactly what kind of creature it was. It was really well done.
I didn't expect much of that once you got towards the end when I'm sorry, say the warrior's name again. Atreyu. When you have Atreyu talking to him and the puppetry, the effects of him talking, the panther looking thing, I thought that was fairly impressive as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And the scene leading up to his confrontation with Gamork, where he's wandering in those ruins on the beach, which incidentally is one of the few scenes that was not filmed on a soundstage in Bavaria. It was in a beach in Spain someplace.
Oh, wow.
But those paintings on the wall where Atreyu was reading on these ancient ruined walls the record of his own adventures. So he's having kind of a meta experience, kind of like what Bastian's having reading the book. And then he gets to the part with he sees Gamork's face painted on the wall behind him, and suddenly, the jump scare of the actual Gamork right behind him. Yeah, and the Gamork, he's the big bad wolf. Like he's like that folktale archetype. Which if you want another connection to comics, I remember in one early issue of Alan Moore and J.H. Williams III's Promethea, where the young, relatively green Promethea, Sophie Bangs, is having her first adventures through the Immateria, which very much like Fantasia is like a gestalt realm of the human imagination. And she encounters the archetype of the big bad wolf. And she says, "Oh my God, I'm so scared. Why am I so scared of this thing?" And her spirit guide, the Babs, the previous Prometheus, says, "Because you're seeing him like without any adult defense mechanisms like irony or distance. You're seeing the wolf the way a child would see it." And so here we are seeing the Gamork, the big bad wolf in the flesh. And, for an obvious puppet, he still gets the job done pretty well.
I want to note, anytime Murd uses the word gestalt on a CGS episode, I'm an extremely happy man.
Oh, absolutely.
I think I've said it like 3 times now, Christo. I hope you're truly happy.
Office hours are posted.
I also kind of wonder what would have been, because of course this was technically a trilogy. All 3 Neverending Story movies were made, but there was a point where they were going to be made a lot closer to back to back, and possibly with the same cast and crew, and maybe even the same director. But Michael Ende, thank you for correcting me on the pronunciation of the name, as I would have been calling him Michael End otherwise. But Michael Ende actually sued over the movie, as he himself was not happy with the changes that were made in the production of this first movie. So he sued the production company, eventually lost, but that's why there was a long break in between first and second movies, and why there are different kids, and why they're basically an entirely different, group of producers and directors are the ones behind it. Because at that point, everyone is
in a vastly different tone. Because I did see the Neverending Story 2, the next chapter, in theaters, and kind of instantly regretted it, because that was just kind of a lame kiddie film. It was exactly what the first Neverending Story was not and did not do. We did kind of talk down to the audience a bit.
When did the second one come out?
1990, I think.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, so you can see the gap there, to say the least. Had they made this movie in 86 or 87, they could have well wound up getting a decent amount of the originals back, probably, and had a much more cohesive story to be told. But as is the case with many things, if you change cast and you change the people behind the scenes, then obviously you're going to get a very, very different product when you're all said and done. Unfortunately, the case.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fun little casting moment I noticed is that the Empress's Chamberlain, I think, was played by Moses Gunn.
He was, yeah.
Who is the big bad gangster in the first two Shaft films. And he also was in the movie Rollerball, I believe, from the 70s
Oh,
as
God,
well.
Rollerball. Jeez.
So it's interesting to see him in a very different type of role.
Yep, that's Fantasia's pretty far away from Harlem. Yes, it's true.
And I like the name Fantasia for the world. Fantasia obviously has Mickey connotations to me, whether I like it or not. But when you think Fantasia, you think exactly what it is: a nice, a full scope fantasy world, and that's exactly what we're presented with here. And I also kind of appreciate just how simple the naming scope of it all is. Fantasia, the nothing. These are all words we can associate with, rather than Galahabaha. And the world is being enveloped by
the moons of Munapur. Anyway, sorry.
Exactly, being enveloped by the Goberstadt. It could be anything you want it to be, but no. Instead, it's words that we can relate to, and nice, simple naming schemes.
What's Alan Rickman saying? Galaxy Quest as that character by the
grab Falls hammer.
Nice. Yeah.
See our retro review of Galaxy Quest.
Yes, it's a hoot and a holler, and I'm super duper happy that we did it. Oh man. Yep.
In the English translation of the book, the name was Fantastica. So I think they went the right way, honestly.
Murd, have you read the book?
Yes, actually, I received.
How do they balance each other out?
Well, obviously, the author wasn't happy with the deviations from the script made by Peterson and his colleagues. At first, he was all for making a movie out of the book, and he worked with them as a consultant. He sold them the rights for a fairly low price, but then fairly late in the process, he became aware that they had made changes without consulting him, and that very much upset him. He wanted them to either can the whole thing or change the title or something, but when they wouldn't, he launched the lawsuit that Ian mentioned. But I have read the book. It was a hardcover copy, because for a long time you could only get it in hardcover, because the author wanted the actual books people could buy to be as similar as possible to the book that Bastian is supposedly reading in the book. So I had a copy. It's if you take off the dust jacket, which was pretty busy, as I recall, it looked like a medieval tapestry, or maybe like a Renaissance fantasy capriccio painting. But underneath, it was just like the Auron symbol, that Ouroboros looking twisted snake medallion that Atreyu wore on the cover, and it was extremely long. As you would expect from something called Neverending. It was a beautifully illuminated manuscript. Each chapter had a huge, full-page color plate illustration at the beginning of each chapter. And a neat trick they did with the ink of the printing of the text itself, like those passages that were set in the real world were printed in red, and those set in Fantastica were printed in green.
Wow.
And the movie really only covers barely the first half of the book. So there would have been room for other movies, certainly. And the second one, at least, does have some characters, a couple of elements taken from later chapters of the book. And the third one I've never even seen, and I don't really care to. I just know that it has it involves like a bunch of teenage bullies getting their hands on the book and trying to rewrite Fantasia to twist it to their jerky teenage whims. Jack Black played one of the bullies.
Okay.
Wow.
Early
Well,
role there.
you know,
Very quick roles,
when
yeah.
he was younger, he played a bully very well because he was a bully in Airborne too, if I remember right. Hockey player bully.
Murd, do you like the book?
Chris, I've been meaning to revisit it for years now as an adult because I was like 6 or 7 when I read it.
Gotcha.
It was by far the longest thing I had attempted to read in my young life at the time I received it. I got it as a Christmas present, but I kept with it and I read it. I can remember when I was somewhere like 3/4 of the way through it, I was adventuring outdoors, right in the middle of like sumac pollination season, and I inhaled a whole bunch of sumac spores, and I had kind of a weird fever after it. It kind of colored my experience of the rest of the book. But I did ultimately finish it. It involved the part of the book that was not adapted for the film. Involved Bastian going into Fantasia, and Ian says he thought he remembered Bastian spending a lot more time in Fantasia with the childlike empress than he actually did in the movie, and that's what we get in the back half of the book.
Okay.
Bastian goes there. It's him wishing Fantasia back to its former glories, slowly but surely, slowly expanding the realm and exploring it and having adventures and slowly losing himself. Like he physically slowly transforms into this fairy tale prince. And he begins to lose his memory of his old world and his old life, and he even forgets his own name. So in the end, Atreyu has to name him the way he had to name the Empress.
Interesting.
And Atreyu also has to promise to finish all the different stories that Bastian started, because that's a conceit of the book. Like a lot of the chapters end with the potential for other stories, other spin-offs or subplots that spin off of little adventures that Bastian or Atreyu have, and the author just ends it with, but that is another story and will be told another time. So at the end, Atreyu has to promise, okay, I'm going to go and finish all those stories that Bastian started. And then only then can Bastian finally return to his old, chubby little 10-year-old self and go back to his neglectful father and his old life in the real world.
Does Bastian, while he still has his memories, wish for his mother to return?
No, I don't think that's within his power.
Okay.
Because that's he can't affect the real world with these wishes. He can only expand Fantastica that way. But he does finally get back home, and his father does notice that he's been gone. But it's not so much a hole in the movie, because really he just went up to that creepy school attic for like one night. And I'm sure his dad probably would have just gotten back from work on this stuff. Maybe he went out to play baseball or something. Maybe he'll surprise me.
Well, Sport, I'm really glad that you're working on your potential.
Maybe he made the swim
some
team.
friends wherever you were all night when you weren't here. Yeah. And that creepy attic, by the way, I related to that setting because my entire childhood was full of creepy, dusty, cluttered rooms.
Sure.
It's just the many times in my childhood I rented that movie or had my parents rent it for me at different video stores. I would take it to my dad's office at the Christmas barn, and that was not too dissimilar from that school attic.
I was thinking about that.
Was not this. An 1818 constructed old brick house, and only half of it had been lived in within the last century, I think, when we moved in. So it was like growing up in the unhaunted half of a half-haunted house. The other half was coated with dust, and pigeons and bats nested there, and we refer to the unfinished half of the house as the other side, which is kind of like the upside down in Stranger Things when you think about it. I grew up with half of that. Like right next to where I slept. So Bastian going up there, it was just kind of like me going off to a corner of the house.
Murd, I've noticed an unsettling trend over the years that you seem to have had a fairly traumatic childhood when it comes to concerns about the supernatural or body horror. Or,
It was a little non-standard, Chris, but I got through it.
I was going to ask you, based on how you were describing that second half of the book, if those chapters were written like short stories, but then you said about how they were, and that'll be told at another time. So it sort of sounds like the beginning of
and that's how
what could be short stories.
End of the movie.
Fairly episodic, actually. But there were like continued threads, like Bastian slowly losing himself and losing touch with his actual reality, and eventually it was made clear the importance that it was he had done Fantastica a great service by going into it and helping to expand it, but he had a still greater service to perform by resuming his old life as a human kid and just kind of spreading the word of Fantastica, just by inspiring his fellow kids to read, basically.
Sure.
And at the end, he does go back to Mr. Coriander's bookshop, so we get closure there. The book has passed out of his grasp during the course of his adventures in Fantastica. But when he goes to apologize to Mr. Coriander, he's just like, I never owned a book like that. What are you talking about? But still, I know what you're talking about because I've been to Fantastica. Let's compare notes on the time we spent there. Because apparently Mr. Coriander was a boy like Bastian at one time and had his own adventures in Fantastica and had done his own bit to save it from the nothing.
Which probably is why he had the bookstore.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's he's been a proselyte of Fantastica ever since.
Yeah.
Also, maybe I did see the second movie and I just have completely forgotten about it, considering that, it probably didn't have that big of an impact on me, which is why I imagined that he was in, Fantasia longer than he was, because clearly there were more adventures to be had in that second movie with John Brandis. So you never know.
Yeah.
All right. Images that I retain of that movie: a lake made of pure acid.
Okay.
A human-sized talking bird named Nimbly.
Yeah.
A guy with 3 faces, an evil sorceress named Zaida, which is Xayide, incidentally, and a giant building shaped like a giant hand that Bastian had to use wishing powers to create footholds to climb up one of the fingers.
I'm pretty
the
sure
final
it's a freaking
confrontation.
movie.
I might have seen a clip of that. I kind of remember the hand thing, but not really anything else. So I might have stumbled across that scene. That part sounds familiar.
Yeah. Well, I did.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm just gonna say I did get this movie, Neverending Story, for $2 on Vudu. Once again,
you lucky bugger!
Everybody use Dista Digital whenever you can.
I completely forgot about that.
And that's how I got it. Maybe I'll do the same for Neverending Story 2, but I don't know if it's worth $2, so I may have to think about that.
I can't make any promises, Ian. I'm just telling you that at the age of 11, I was instantly convinced that it was a much inferior product.
Oh, and I know it is. I know it is just by the reviews. Like it got maybe like a 17% versus the 86% that this one has. So yeah, not a lot of good things going for it. What were we going to say, Chris?
Because we mentioned this briefly earlier. The scene where he comes upon the scientist and as he calls her, his wench.
The witch.
Who are much smaller in stature than the warrior. But I was like, is this where they got Miracle Max from? Like it's almost like pitch perfect. Shay, you know what I'm talking about?
Well,
I mean,
I was thinking of the brownies from Willow myself.
Oh,
I mean, the brownies are much smaller, but
I just meant the dynamic between him and the woman. Like it just reminded me of Billy Crystal and Carol Kane.
Oh
Bride.
yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of too. I just didn't recognize the name Miracle Max.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, totally. I see that. That's all. What, Princess Bride, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I just felt it was such an obvious
similarity.
It's the similarity between the two. So, I mean,
no, I agree.
Princess Bride is one of my favorite movies, period. But
yeah.
To bring it back to the books for a minute, there were 2 scenes that they wanted to actually film for this movie that were directly from the books, but due to special effects, it didn't wind up happening. The initial appearance of Falcor was meant to be filmed. Just they couldn't pull it off due to the fact that it just would have taken too much money and too many special effects.
Yeah, Atreyu had to rescue Falcor from like a shape-shifting creature that changed from like the swarm of wasps into a spider and a bunch of other things too. So I guess instead of building all those different puppet effects, they just thought, Falcor's just going to show up.
Exactly, and the second scene involved Falcor encountering the wind giants. Giant creatures made of clouds and being caught in a fight between them, which again, to make wind giants probably was well above the already massive budget of the film, and they decided not to do it. So those were
and that sounds very much like God, what are they called in the Hobbit?
Oh,
aren't there
the stone
giants?
Yeah,
maybe,
possibly, yeah.
Maybe.
Yep, but yeah, that similar concept at least from the sounds of it. So yeah.
Speaking of images of clouds, though, and this thing draws me in visually from the opening title sequence, which is just different images of like shifting cloud formations with credits in front of while the the Limahl title theme plays in the background. It's just those swirling ominous cloud formations. It kind of reminded me of like the marbled end papers of a book, which is very appropriate to a movie like this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, even just looking at some of the cloud, I mean, even the cloud formation itself that is the nothing. Looking at a image that I found of it here, you know, like that's, oof. It's certainly striking to say the least, and really adds to the world building of itself. Although I know that this is just like a representation of it, not necessarily what you got in the movie itself. But immediately I'm thinking, of course, of yet again Crisis on Infinite Earths, looking at this and you know, the disappearing universe and what have you being engulfed. So you can have that going for it.
Red skies, unnatural storms, white walls.
Yep.
Well, and like you said, Adam, I always like when books have some kind of designed end papers in the beginning, in the front and the back, whether they be paisley marbled, some caricatures from the book itself or the comic, whatever it is. I just always enjoyed that little extra touch.
Yep. And of course,
Skies are red right behind the
red skies.
Yeah.
Right there, the title card with Wolfgang Petersen's name. Like that's enough there for you right there.
Let's take a moment and talk about the song.
Yes.
Wow.
And I have to wonder, since it got a new lease on life in Stranger Things,
It sure did.
I wonder if the movie's gained renewed attention.
I think
that.
probably
I read
for a
somewhere
short
that
time.
the original music video for the song, at least, had an increase in views on YouTube by 800%.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. I'm sure the movie did experience some spike as a result of that.
I hope so.
And there was a bidding war a couple of years ago on somebody trying to do either a remake or a miniseries. There was a miniseries that was produced at one point, but nothing that was, you know, worth really mentioning. Because in 2009, Warner Brothers was first starting about to talk about a remake. And then in September 2022, there was a bidding war for the film and TV rights of Neverending Story between studios and streamers. So if that may, you know, obviously the timing of that and Stranger Things makes sense. Whether or not we're actually going to get a remake of this at any point, who knows? Part of me wonders whether we even should, to be honest with you. Although, yes, obviously they would wind up doing probably more of the story than we got, but the movie's just so good as it is that I hate to see something come in there and not execute nearly as well with modern sensibilities.
And also, it's very evocative, and Shane was referencing this before. It's very evocative of a particular time in movie making that obviously can't be reproduced. Now, they might do, like you said, for the full book, so to speak, and that might be fascinating in its own right, which would be a very different film. Now, Ian, I'm sorry, you mentioned they produced a miniseries?
Yes, in Canada.
Was it actually aired?
Yes, it was aired, and it was aired back in 1995. Actually, so that's how long ago that happened. It aired apparently on HBO here in the States, but Family Channel in Canada, and it was, they call it a miniseries, but this thing was 26 episodes long.
Wow.
And I literally didn't even know that it existed until I
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And this is an adaptation of the book?
This is an adaptation of the book, yes. And it has Janet Lane Green as Zaida, Dominic Zamparagna as Atreyu, and then the list goes on and on. Like all names that I'm not at all familiar with, but it does look like that this is at least a more faithful version of, or attempted to be a more faithful version of an adaptation, as the plot sounds almost exactly like the actual first book rather than anything that was made up. So, yeah.
Now, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, may have to track it down. That's all.
I'm very curious too, because this is the first I've ever heard of this.
Yeah, no, I never heard of that either. And I mean, we had HBO for years in my household as a kid, and I don't ever remember seeing anything like that for Neverending Story aired in the United States. Okay, so now I have a question for Adam, and this is heartfelt, honest to God. I'm wondering about this. Part of the story revolves around this young boy who is dealing with the trauma, losing his mother, and escaping to read this book, and escaping the bullies, and
his math test.
And finding his place in this universe that I imagine will eventually give him confidence as well to return to his normal life. But he's kind of skipping school for the day to do it. And I know you have a very aversion to Ferris Bueller skipping school. I honest to God, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
How you
trying to trap me with hypocrisy here. Right?
No. I'm genuinely curious because they're, in my mind, in some ways, they're very similar, but in very different ways. And I'm just curious. What's the differential between the two?
Well,
it's okay if you never thought of it that way. I
would never have thought of these two movies.
I was just thinking about it today over lunch of all things. I'm like, wait a minute.
Any two of the same brain cells in my no.
And that's perfectly fair.
I never would have made a connection at all, Shane. And
it's a bizarre thing that just entered my head, and I went, that's weird.
Yeah, Ferris Bueller he's ditching school to be a dick, basically. Whereas Bastian is having actual, psychological problems. He's trying to process the grief over the loss of his mother, as you pointed out. He's being bullied. He's not learning what he probably should be. He's not getting what he should be getting out of his lessons at school. So I think missing one lousy day of school, one stupid little math test, in the grand scheme of things, is totally an acceptable loss based on what he's gaining in terms of psychic integration and just, helping to save the entire fantasy mindscape of the human race.
Sure. Great answer, Murd. Great answer.
As opposed to just, going into Chicago and crashing a parade and insulting a snooty French waiter and all the stuff that Ferris Bueller gets up to.
And
the stakes are not quite the same.
Two totally different age brackets, too. I mean, you're talking about, like you say, missing a math test versus like high school. While one day probably doesn't mean a whole lot, it is very different in your maturity level.
It doesn't mean a whole lot, I can assure you.
And it's not just one day in Ferris Bueller's case either. It's an entire pattern of behavior.
Well, true, very true. I again, just something that oddly, I'm not kidding, over lunch struck me as I was thinking about the Neverending Story and just what it all entailed and how I felt about it, and just trying to put words together in my head. And I thought,
well, you know what?
I've got to ask.
You know what, Shane? We don't know what day of the week it was. It could have been a Saturday. We don't know. Not one day of the week actually said. So I'm just going to no prize this away by saying that he snuck into the school on a Saturday and was there Saturday and Sunday, and his father didn't even know.
They were there in class having tests.
He interrupted the breakfast club.
Yeah. Might have been detention.
That's a great way of putting it. By the way, before listeners wind up, giving us the quote unquote corrections, it was an animated series. That happened it.
Well, that's even more interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, it was Neverending Story, the animated adventure, which I will do a picture of right now that I found the box art.
Wow.
For. Yeah, so it looks very 1992 in its execution, and way more kiddier than I would have liked. But
looks like a bootleg you'd see being sold for $3.99 at your local TV.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I'm not quite as inspired to seek this out.
Well, I'm glad I got to at least to the bottom of it to figure out what the heck this thing was. But yes, I myself actually agree with you that it kind of made me a little bit less interested. But now I understand how it completely, didn't manifest for us. Like, it was an HBO animated series, and HBO is not exactly
26 episodes.
For its animated series. So there you go.
Yeah.
Yep. That makes a little bit more sense now.
But
Well,
not to
and-
malign the Canadian contributions to the lore of the Neverending Story. The scenes featuring Bastian at home and in school and being chased by bullies down the streets, they were all filmed in Vancouver. So
Ah.
there we go.
Go. Nice. Nice.
Shout out to Big Jim Land.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and Adam, seriously,
I
thank
was
you.
wondering what city it was actually because I couldn't quite place it, and now I realize, oh, I recognize it from everything. It's Vancouver. So there you go.
What I wanted to say was, Adam, thank you for entertaining my question. I really was not trying to put you on the spot or invoke some kind of hypocrisy. I was genuinely curious. I know your predication for a lot of interesting facts, and I just wondered if that ever crossed your mind.
It never did, Shane, but thank you for presenting that dragon so that I could slay it immediately.
Nice.
All right. Now, we can't let this discussion end, though, without bringing up... I'm glad that we've covered, Limahl and his single, which was... I think it hit number 1 in Sweden and Norway, incidentally.
That's not
Really?
surprising. It's got a bit of an ABBA feel to it. I can understand that.
Well, yeah, it's just that Scandinavian fantasy feel, but it didn't get any higher than number 6 in the U.S. But still, it's. I don't know, Shane. You mentioned last week or so when we were talking about doing this episode that you remembered hearing that song on the radio fairly often.
Oh yeah.
I did too. It was like just a fond remembrance of the movie that I had seen in that summer night the year before.
Well, and then like Ian said with the Stranger Things revival, it's all over the radio since that series has aired. Something that we talked about with things being set in this time period that you can't replicate or duplicate. I will say I do think every season of Stranger Things comes as close as you can possibly get to replicating things made in the 80s.
Oh, absolutely.
And feeling like it's in the 80s. And that's part of the
part
charm.
of its charm. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of the allure.
It especially that first season and that first experience, it really looked like something that was made in the 80s and lost and forgotten and never aired. And to bring even just the song of the Neverending Story and the little bit of connection that has in that last season really kind of brings that, to me, full circle into things made in the 80s that really do look like they were made in the 80s.
Definitely. Yep. 100%.
Well, yeah, the attention to detail in Stranger Things is superb.
It's phenomenal.
I mean, right down to all the minutia of the pop culture, the clothing, the games, the bicycles, everything. I mean, it's
background cups, to arcade, everything. Oh God, it's amazing.
Yep. And for that matter, we need to discuss the childlike Empress. Not quite child. Childlike.
Ian, I had a similar reaction. I think to myself, am I watching one of those creepy child fashion shows like you saw in Little Miss Sunshine? It was because it was almost like she was, and maybe this was on purpose. Like she was like a woman who was like in a child's body. And granted, she was the Empress, so she has this authority. But it didn't take me out of the movie, but it struck me.
Is there an age to her in the book that she's been around for thousands of years?
Yes, absolutely. That's why she's the childlike Empress. She's not actually a child. She's existed as long as people have been telling stories.
Okay.
But the actress was 11, just for the record.
Yes. And she had just lost she had lost 2 teeth. And they wound up having to put in essentially veneers in order for her to film her scenes properly.
Oh geez.
So that's another thing in there. I don't know. I think of all the casting in this movie, I would have cast someone different for the childlike Empress, but obviously they were going for something specific there. They were going ageless or whatever. It didn't quite connect with me. The one part of the movie that didn't, frankly. But you can't win them all, I guess, when it comes to casting.
Fortunately, it was a short part of the movie.
Yes, very true. Had they adapted more of the book, then it wouldn't have been nearly as short. But I guess for what they were executing in this, then yes, it worked for what they had. So maybe it was a good thing that they didn't adapt more.
That part didn't actually bother me. I just took it more of like an elf looking very young and very wise,
Yeah,
well beyond
Yeah.
what we would see.
She, like Murd said, she's an ageless being.
Yeah.
Right.
Essentially, it's just I think initially because it's so obviously a little girl,
Mhm.
but she's reading her lines. It's a good performance, really.
Oh, yeah.
As someone who is like this timeless, wise ancient entity.
Mhm.
So you just have to kind of, I think, just kind of get used to that.
And I do at least like I am glad though that she is a child, because I think back to when I saw a stage production of Coraline many years ago, and they had a older woman playing Coraline as a child, and that was creepier than
That's
this.
hard.
That was creepier than this, because there was something just very disconnecting and not something that I was ever actually able to really like say was a good idea about the whole performance. But I'm Coraline, I'm a little girl. Like, no, you're not. No, you're not. Please,
Yeah.
please stop.
You're creeping me out. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But the wish fulfillment at the end of this film, with coming out of the book essentially and kicking the ass of the bullies, that's just pitch perfect right there.
I was so angry at them in the beginning of the
awful.
movie.
Ugh.
I was hoping that they were going to run into the dumpster. I actually wanted the dragon to sit on the dumpster and not let them out for a while. Oh, God, that kind of stuff really pisses me off. I mean, 50-year-old I'm mad at kids being bullies. Oh, God, it's so aggravating.
The heck of it is, that ending was conceived of at the last minute. Like, originally, the movie was just going to end with Bastian and the childlike emperor standing there in the void with the seed, and Bastian thinking about what he would wish for.
That's weird.
Then they gave him his little ride on the back of Falcor, and the chance to dive bomb the bullies, which was just wonderful closure for everybody in the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, since we didn't get the dad to find out what he thought, and we didn't get the bookstore guy, at least we got that, which gave some closure to the story.
Yeah, I really wanted to see Mr. Coriander again because I loved his performance.
Even if it was just him opening the door, looking in the window, and the book dealer,
approvingly.
yes, winking, nodding, or
I told
something.
you the book wouldn't be safe, or something like that. Now you understand what I was saying. I wasn't.
Or even now we have a lot to talk about, or it's just something. I
much prefer him than seeing dear old dad again, because I don't know how he would have reacted.
Well, I really thought that part would have been Bastian coming back and saying something or doing something, or even being missing for a period of time, and kind of putting his father in his place a little bit, even if it was as a young boy, like, hey, Dad, you know what? Kind of back off. I'm fine now, or just something like that.
He probably wouldn't even noticed he was gone.
Probably not. I would have much rather seen the book dealer.
Yeah.
Here's what would have happened. He would have seen Falcor, and he would have said to himself, "Oh, it seems you found yourself a dog in order to get away a little bit and not think about your dear dead mother a little bit more. Good job there, son. I'm glad you're putting things together."
Is there any kind of flashback discussion that Bastian has with his mother in the book at all, or it's just she's just known to be passed and that's it?
I honestly don't remember.
I'm just curious.
She might not even be dead in the book, for that matter.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
During the first Ivory Tower scene, when the group of Fantasians are gathered together,
I love one of my favorite scenes.
The fort is awesome.
Great designs.
Yoda, Mickey Mouse, Chewbacca, C-3PO, the Ewoks, E.T., and Gumby are all in the background.
Really?
Apparently.
I kind of thought I picked out Chewbacca somewhere, but I
Wow.
was just assuming it was a furry guy that they dressed up.
Yep.
I'm really gonna have to go back and look at that and see if I can pick some of them out.
I guess if you if you put things far enough in the background, you don't have to worry about the copyright cops and what have you. So that.
And you say in the first time they visit the Ivory Tower.
Yes, in the first time they visit the Ivory Tower. Yep.
And there's that big crowd of delegates and ambassadors.
I love the delegates with the three faces.
Yes.
And the other guys with the enormous horned heads that take up half their bodies.
Yep.
They did a really good job with
Mushroom head guys.
with the makeup for the three-faced creatures, going along with again the multi-faced Battlestar Galactica dancers and singers was kind of what struck me in that way.
Deep Roy in this movie, got to point that out. But as always happy to see Deep Roy in anything. And although it was not his voice, he was a part of the filming process. So got to bring that up. And I didn't know about Steven Spielberg's involvement with the film, that he assisted with the editing and marketing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense now that I think about it, because it's very much a Spielbergian
absolutely
feel to the movie. So the fact that he had any sort of influence on it makes perfect sense when you think about it. Yep. And he even still has, I think, one or two of the props in his office to this very day from Neverending Story. So
probably grabbed an Oren to take off the set with him.
Yep, I think
I see Mickey Mouse.
I
see the Ewoks.
Right? Okay.
I see E.T. Son of a Gun.
Wow, I'll have to go check that out.
Those E.T. aliens find their ways in all kinds of movies.
Shane, did you just find a still online, or
no? I started looking at it on my phone.
Okay,
and God, focus over. There it is. Over here.
Yeah,
is E.T. and Mickey Mouse.
Wow, I'll have to check that out.
Now it's fading. Oh, the Ewoks are right kind of over there, the two of them. It's hard to see on the phone, but yeah, they're definitely there.
I think I found an image. Hopefully,
C-3PO might be the one to the right.
Okay, I'm trying to find a high quality image of it to bring up. Let's see here. If not, I do have at least a small one where you can sort of.
Yeah, I can't pull up my phone anymore.
Here we go. Got it. Okay. Here we go. And once this opens up, I will go ahead and share that.
Fascinating bit.
Oh yeah, no, just the more you know. That's the way that I'll put it. But okay, it's
well, God, if I could make money on the useless trivia in my head, I'd be a rich man.
Oh, you and me both, Shane. I mean, come on, that's all part of it.
Any tidbit like this, man, I'm all for.
Between the four of us, I think we'd have the U.S. gross national product.
Yeah.
Hey, yep.
Look at that. There's C-3PO on the right.
Yep. There's ET on the far right.
Far right. Yep. I see him.
Yoda's right there in the center. Yep. The Ewoks.
Oh, where's Yoda?
Yoda's like right.
Yeah.
There.
Okay. Up there in the back.
Yep.
Oh yeah, there he is.
Yep.
Under the fountain. Yeah. To the far left, you can see kind of a rat-like creature. Maybe that's supposed to be.
I was wondering if that was the secret of Nim.
And I'm trying to find.
Maybe that's the one.
I'm trying to find.
There's the rat creature in blue, but right above it, well, that could be Nim.
Yeah.
Not that you said that. I'm just.
Or it could be Scooby Doo.
Yeah. But now I'm looking for Chewbacca.
Yeah, he's in the back, kind of towards the middle. You see that slug-like thing?
He's to the right of the slug.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Wow. I am so glad that I found an image of that. That is outstanding.
Yeah, Mickey Mouse in yours is just a little harder to see than on mine, but I turned my brightness way up. And
where is Mickey Mouse standing, Shane?
You see the 2 feet at the bottom? There's the Ewoks to the right, and then right there.
Oh,
I'm touching my screen.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Like two over from Chewbacca.
Absolutely. Yep.
Outstanding. Mind you, the picture that I brought up is quite literally from somebody's monitor. You can even see the insignia logo on it. So.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, wow, that is awesome, and I'm so glad that that's a piece of trivia there on IMDb just to make us respect the scene that much further. Good stuff.
That was awesome.
Awesome. And this was awesome in general. Once again, Murd, thank you very much.
Great selection.
Excellent selection.
We can't bid farewell to Fantasia without mentioning. We've covered the single. We got to mention the score because it's been reverberating in my mind, since 1984. It was composed by Klaus Doldinger, who's better known as a jazz musician, and two themes in particular, like the travel music for when Atreyu's galloping across the landscape, and also later when Bastian's flying on Falcor. That's yes, and even more impactful than that, devotees of the time bubble will remember one time when I talked about the first part of Maximum Security by Kurt Busiek. And there was a gathering of space, having reference in the council world of Selandiar in the Shi'ar Empire to discuss what's to be done with Earth. And it made me think of the scene, probably the single most powerful image in my memory of this movie is when the Night Hob on his stupid bat first flies within sight of the ivory tower, and he's awestruck and says, "I didn't think it would be so beautiful." And we see the ivory tower, and the ivory tower theme plays. Dung, 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 dung. And that's what I imagined when reading that Maximum Security one-shot. Probably dignifying it more than that particular comic book deserves to be, but it just...
God, I'm enjoying this. Fantastic,
gives me
Murd.
chills every bloody time.
Well,
and we hear it again later on when Atreyu and Falcor find, the ivory tower adrift among the space rubble that is all that's left of the once proud realm of Fantasia.
Yeah.
we have all definitely just gotten chills in one way or the other with that right there. That is 100%. And I agree entirely on the score of this film that it's just really effective. It gets the mood down, and it never really strays too happy or too dark. Like it's kind of like smack dab in the middle, which is exactly what I want from a score for a movie of this fashion, and well executed all the way around.
Yep. And he doesn't overscore it either. It's one of the things that lends itself to that air of dignity about this movie that I mentioned earlier. Just this 80s starkness is that there's not background music for a lot of the scenes. So this isn't like John Williams where he has to score every little thing. It's scored less and therefore scored better. It's just the music is there when it's most important, and it's stirring. Like you said, Ian, it's not too happy, it's not too melancholy. It's got just this heroic dignity about it. It's almost like an operatic leitmotif for like a Wagnerian sequence or something. It's just what the movie needs. It suits the mood and the ambiance just right, and it will forever live in my noggin. So for as long as I live, some piece of Fantasia will dwell musically within my gray matter.
Long life, Murd. Long life.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Hear, hear. We need freckin' swears, so let's make the magic happen here. Chris, how many freckin' swears you give it?
4.5.
Okay, nicely done. Shane?
Yeah, I agree with Chris.
I'm gonna go 4.25 out of 5. It's a lot of fun, and I'm super duper glad that I went back to it. And honestly, it's one of the movies that I think holds up the best from my youth to now when I think about it. So yeah, very very good stuff. And Murd?
I could not give it less than 5 or fewer than 5.
There you go. Excellent. Well done, and well done, gentlemen. And our next pick has already been made. So before we wrap up here, next pick goes to Sir Eberly. And what have you chosen, sir?
Well, this was a very easy selection for me because it's the movie I wanted to talk about from when we first initiated this series, but I wanted to give it some time. I'll start with a famous line. It's a madhouse! A madhouse! Planet of the Apes, ladies and gentlemen, 1968, coming your way.
What's wrong with me? I think you're crazy. Need a second opinion? You're also lazy.
Dr. Zayas.
There's going to be a lot of references to the Planet of the Apes musical to be found in that episode, whether you like it or not.
I have a feeling this is going to be an epic, hearty episode.
From chimpanzee to chimpanzee.
Yeah.
You finally made a monkey out of me.
I forgot about that.
Finally made a monkey.
There we go.
Amazing.
He's going to do a lot of Borscht Bell for this episode.
Oh, you better
No
do.
talking about JL Ape, though. That was terrible.
Hey, you put an ape in a comic book, and what happens, baby? It sells, okay?
I know Jamie loved it, and I appreciate it, but not JL Ape. Oof, drop that one out. Everything else fine, but not that one.
Oh, my God. Sell, baby, sell. Sell, baby, sell. Excellent. Alrighty. Well, thank you, fine listeners, once again at patreon.com/comicgeekspeak for all your continued support of the show for as little as $1 a month. We really do greatly appreciate it. And Shane, over to you.
Ooh, I get to play Shane again. Well, visit us at comicgeekspeak.com. To send us an email, the address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. To leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com. Look us up on YouTube at youtube.com/comicgeekspeak. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, send in Muddle the Murds, even as many as you want, because we could use a supply. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
I love when Shane gets unhinged.
That is indeed another story. Fantastic.
And shall be told another time.